Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Zeith, and I am the Digital Marketing Specialist at School Health Corporation, and I will be today's webinar moderator. You have joined Ensure Your School's AED program is Act 35 compliant, designed for school districts in Pennsylvania. We are looking forward to providing you with some actionable information today to help you improve your school's response to a sudden cardiac arrest emergency. But before I hand it off to our presenters, I would like to go over a few things about today's webinar. We will not be taking audio questions, but would like you to submit your questions via the questions interface in GoToWebinar. We encourage you to submit your questions at any time during the presentation. The presentation will take about 40 minutes, and we will leave the remaining time at the end to address your questions. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to it will be posted on the schoolhealth.com website after the webinar, as well as emailed to you for future playback. Everyone who attends today's webinar will also be receiving a certificate of attendance for joining us today. You can expect to receive your follow-up email, which contains a link to the recording and your certificate of attendance in about 5 business days. It just takes us a few days to post the video to the website and gather all of the resources for you. And last but not least, one lucky attendee who stays on to the end of today's webinar will be selected a free cardiac science Power Heart AED for their school. Very exciting. If you are having technical difficulties with the audio or visual portion of today's webinar, please contact our webinar service provider directly. And with that, I would like to hand it off to today's presenters, Chip Miller and Joanne Nicholas.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chip Miller. Let me go through our agenda quickly, and then we'll make some introductions. Besides our 2 presenters, we will cover the need for AEDs, the 5 steps for compliance, the best practices for an AED program in a school district, a call to action for not only the nurses but also for the school boards and the school superintendents. We'll have a question and comments period at the end and some closing remarks, as well as some handouts that will be available at the end of the presentation by contacting Joanne Nicholas at School Health. So I should have control here. Let me click on the next slide. There we go. Give you a little background of how AEDs got into schools in Pennsylvania in the first place. Back in 2000, a gentleman by the name of Greg Moyer died on the basketball court of a $50 million brand new high school in East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. And Greg's parents that night were told that had an AED be present, Greg might still be with them. And John and Rachel Moyer made it their life's mission to get AEDs into the schools, not only in Pennsylvania, but across the country. So their initial efforts back between 2000 and 2001 convinced our state legislatures to provide $2.4 million in tobacco settlement funds to the schools in the form of 2 AEDs being sent to every school district in Pennsylvania. The schools through 2002 all the way through 2005 were offered low-cost AEDs through a supplement of this tobacco grant through one manufacturer. What got us to Act 35, or the AEDs law today, is that we've gone into school districts across the Commonwealth and we have found that some of these original AEDs that were sent to the school district are still in the same boxes that they were shipped in, that school districts have not embraced AEDs. So let me give you a little background about myself. I'm an AED specialist. I have been involved with AEDs since 1984 when the first ones came out. I live in Newtown Square, Pennsylvania, a little bit outside of Philadelphia. My background's one of a paramedic and a volunteer firefighter. I worked at Crozier Chester Medical Center for 20 4 years full-time and a few years part-time after that. And I realized that going out to other people's cardiac arrest, we weren't making a large difference, and that by 1984, when I was introduced with AEDs, that these could be the game changer. And so not only did I teach people how to use AEDs for 10 years, but then I started selling, servicing, training for the past 30 years now with AEDs. I also had a heart attack, bypass surgery, and my cardiac arrest took place in the ICU after all that took place. So as the nurses on this call know, the best place to have a cardiac arrest is in the ICU of the hospital, because 95% of people that go into cardiac arrest in the hospital get to walk out. And I'm one of those 95%. But over the years, I've been energetic, very passionate, optimistic, and I'm very success-driven about getting AEDs everywhere, and specifically our schools. I want to help you develop the best program to provide the greatest chance of saving a life in your school district. My cohort today is Joanne Nicholas. Joanne, I'll let you talk about yourself.
Hi, this is Joanne. I've been fortunate enough to work with school nurses and be a part of school health for 17 years, making me a certified AED specialist, helping nurses place and manage their AEDs in the schools for about 15 or 14 years. I've worked with thousands of school districts to help develop and implement heart-safe solutions in both Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and I'm always trying to find the nurses funds to get what they need, whether it be an AED initiative or law, whether it be vision or hearing, and that has made me quite the new product expert for the school nursing market, and I'm going to pass it back to Chip so he can start our presentation.
Okay. So the next part of our agenda would be the 5 steps for compliance. And before we go into those, let's talk about the overall legislation that matters for school districts, for anyone attempting to use an AED. Pennsylvania, a Good Samaritan law back in 1998 was amended by our legislators to allow anyone, trained or untrained, to attempt to use an AED in a cardiac arrest situation and not be held liable for the outcome of the patient. That Good Samaritan law has been amended once since 1998, and the amendments were placed to protect the acquirers of AEDs, the people that buy the AEDs, so that anyone can use them. And it specifically says in law that you will not be held liable as an acquirer as long as you do 3 things. You buy the AED properly, meaning that you have a prescription for your AED. 2, that you offer training to the expected users. And 3, that you maintain your AED to the manufacturer's specification. If you do those 3 things as a school district, you're well protected under the Good Samaritan law. Which brings us to April of 2014. Now, from the time that Greg Moyer passed away in East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania in 2000, AEDs went out, schools embraced them, and as school health and a number of manufacturers were out trying to help nurses implement their AED programs and expand their AED programs, we were finding that AEDs were not maintained, that there were not enough AEDs, that not all the areas were covered. And what Act 35, or fondly known as Aiden's Law. Aiden passed away 4 years ago, and his parents, Steve and Christy Silva, begged their state legislators to help with this initiative to either come up with guidelines or some type of mandate for AEDs to be in the schools. They wanted something in memory of their son to show that they were doing positive things to help combat sudden cardiac arrest. So some of the initial bills that had been submitted over the years, since the past 3 to 4 years, had mandates in there. X number of AEDs per school building, per floor, per athletic department, per game that was played. And as we know, as these bills go through the legislative process, they get watered down. Our elected officials sometimes are very gun-shy about creating an unfunded mandate. So what both sides of the House agreed upon was this Act 35 that sort of sets the stage for a possible mandate in the future. Right now in Pennsylvania, there is no mandate to have AEDs in schools. It is the best practice. It is an expectation, but there is no law saying you must have them in your schools, which is very disheartening. Act 35 requires the school districts to report what they have, knowing that some of these AEDs go all the way back to 2001 and 2002, meaning they're out of warranty, the indemnifications have run out, some of them aren't even serviceable anymore, and we knew that the school districts were going to be in a tailspin about trying to replace these, and when they're looking to replace them, Act 35 also wants you to expand your program. It wants you to look at other areas that may not traditionally have AEDs and carry the torch out to the practice games and the pickup games to ensure our students are well, let alone the parents of the students, the teachers, and the employees of the school district. So over the years, school health, a number of other AED experts have been able to come up with a set of best practices so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Although Joanne and I have personally met school nurses, school administrators, school facilities people that have some of the best AED programs going because they understand the importance. 9 out of 10 times when we ask how they got to this point, it was because they were reactive and not necessarily proactive. So we find ourselves helping you with this burden by educating the district as a whole, the school board, the superintendent, the pupil services director, the business officers, so that the AED program is not just a nurse's program or an athletics program. It is a district program. It also can help with some budget issues as we move on here, and it truly has worked in a number of school districts across the Commonwealth, and with Joanne's experience through New Jersey, this has become almost common practice that the school district now embraces AEDs as an overall program. So what are some of the 5 steps for the best practices? Number 1 is the medical oversight. In Pennsylvania, I told you what is required is in order to purchase an AED, because all AEDs are Class 3 medical devices, a prescription is required. So I know you can't answer me right now, but think where your prescriptions are for your AEDs, if you can even find them. Some of the AEDs that were shipped 15 years ago or 14 years ago, are those prescriptions even in existence anymore? The reason we bring this up, 1, it's pointed out in the Good Samaritan law, and 2, if you deploy and use an AED on a patient and that patient isn't cooperative and stays dead, then one of the first questions, if any kind of legal action is brought up, is, well, did you buy this AED properly? Let's see your prescription for it. The second question that comes up, what kind of standing orders do you have? What are your best practices? Can you show me a 1 or 2 page document that says, in case of a cardiac arrest, here's the actions that are going to be followed, and were those actions followed? And then finally, the post-event data reporting. Can you download your device and get out what the machine did? Know that the machine had maintained and has been maintained, and at the same time make sure that the steps in your standing orders or your best practices have been followed. The second would be some type of protocols. And the protocols to use an AED are pretty straightforward. You look at the patient, they're not breathing, they don't have a pulse. You hook an AED to them, you start CPR, you call 911. It does not have to be a complicated protocol. But at the same time, everyone in the district should be aware of the protocols. The cardiac arrest specific emergency action plan would help educate everyone in the school district. And this would include locations of AEDs, your list of trained responders, and there is no expectation that these trained responders are always going to be on site. I know that's a question that comes up a lot of times, that if we place AEDs, do we always have to have people here? And with the commonality of AEDs in schools and in public areas now, there are people other than the quote-unquote trained responders that can attempt to use these, and of course in the Commonwealth they are well protected by our Good Samaritan laws. Are your AEDs easy to use? Do people know how to use them? Do you have a three-step card that's next to the AED? Do you have posters up? Is there an online training tool that can be sent to everyone in the school district if they care to click on that link and learn how to use an AED, whether they're using the one in the school or they're using the one in the airport? This starts putting together a great approach to having a great AED program. One of the biggest bugaboos is either the lack of maintenance or the unknown amount of maintenance that the AEDs receive. Some of the school districts that we've been in, absolutely everything is checked on a regular basis. There's documentation for it. Other school districts, once a year they may look at their AEDs at the beginning of the school year and before they put them away. So you need a maintenance record around your AEDs. And every AED is different in what the manufacturer requires for maintenance. And then, of course, some type of simple post-event data report that can be filled out after an AED is used. Joanne and I are going to split this slide, so let me talk about a little bit about CPR and AED training. We were lucky enough to do a 90-minute presentation at the PSNAPS conference 2 weeks ago. And we had 40, 50 people in the presentation, and one of the nurses trains anyone and everyone that will sit still in the school district. It's not a mega school district by any means, but she is an American Heart Association instructor, and they train everyone. And I say everyone, meaning from the elected board members all the way down to the students into the 6th grade. They're teaching how to use an AED and what CPR is. Some people are certified, some are being trained in hands only, but the awareness level of CPR AED training is throughout that school district. Other school districts said it's like pulling teeth to get someone to come to a CPR AED training. So there should be buy-in from the school district, from the business officer, that there is a stated group of people that are trained. The laws do not say how many people per school should be trained. Some states do. Pennsylvania does not. When we look at the American Heart Association and ask what their best practices are, they recommend 5 people around an AED being trained. So if you had one AED in an elementary school, it would be reasonable to have 5 people that are seated in that elementary school, whether it's the principal, whether it's an athletics person, a physical education person, a custodian, some group of people that are trained to use that AED and to be able to respond in an emergency. So now I'm going to pass it over to Joanne Nicholas, and she's going to talk a little bit about AED drills and some good news around AED drills. Joanne?
I wanted to share a story that I was told yesterday by the head of special ed in Elizabeth Public Schools, who actually is the head of the nurses. She called and told me that they ran a drill 2 weeks ago, and this is not something they have to do in New Jersey, just like Pennsylvania. It's nurses who are moving forward and going above and beyond. They run drills, and a week later, they had a save of a 3rd grader. So pretty amazing, still giving me tingles from yesterday. They do practice drills. They practiced 2 weeks ago, and a week later they had a save of a 3rd grader. So very, very timely and very important. And all of this stuff, hopefully it's not scaring you. Chip and I can share cardiac emergency responder plans and code blue drills with you at the end of this presentation. So don't get too ahead of yourself. We'll be able to help you with that. And you can move to the next slide, Chip.
Before we do, the little bit of research that's been done and what's been presented to me over the years is in the 1940s, 1950s, there was a loss of life, a significant loss of life in a school. And from that time on, nationally, there have been fire drills in schools since the 1950s. You all go through them either on a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, a semester basis, but every school has fire drills, with very few exceptions that I'm aware of. Because you have these fire drills since the 1950s, there have been 0 deaths in a school building due to a fire. Sad to say, we can't say the same thing about cardiac arrest and AEDs. So having hands-on practice sessions truly could turn the tide in at least people responding and doing the right things. Doesn't mean every patient's going to cooperate and come alive again, but at least the school district is well prepared and can say, we did everything according to oil. Joanne?
Yeah, so site evaluations. This is something that you can do yourself or have an AED specialist do. We want to make sure that you know where to place an AED. If you have an AED centrally located in your school, take a brisk walk to the furthest location in your school. Can you get there in a 90-second brisk walk to that furthest location away? If you can't, you need to reevaluate where your AED is placed or determine whether you need more than one. Often it's just placing it in a different location. Let's think about gym classes. Where are we going for PE? Is there an AED available? Can we get there within 90 seconds? How about those other outdoor events, whether it be a field day or getting into athletics, practices and games? We want to make sure that you're covering your athletes. Really, one of the most important about most of these AEDs is making sure that you're covering your pupils during school-based functions. So let's make sure we're doing that. And often districts will come to agreements or have a little contract saying, if you come to a game at our district, we will make sure we have an AED available. So let's make sure we're covering our kids for all of those after-school activities. Signage, real important. Say that science room is the furthest location away from your AED. Let's place a sign in that room, making sure that people know where the closest AED is. And then as they exit the room, directional signs back to that AED, almost like a maze. Those are the things that are important. Those are the things that are working in states like New Jersey, where we're seeing 2, 3, 4 saves of children, parents, grandparents in the schools. And let's not forget those additional locations. Bus depots, maintenance office. How about those district offices where your principals or your superintendents are located? Those are all really, really important. So again, you can do it yourself, or you can have an AED expert evaluate that at no cost.
Let me chime in here. Some unofficial research that's been done just in Pennsylvania since 2000 shows that one of the #1 areas that cardiac arrests take place with students is on the basketball court. #2, all other sports-related activities. #3, are the sports-related activities that are not necessarily organized. So you have your pickup games, you have your intramural games, and I think we all have a false sense of security that, well, a trainer is at our regular games and so on, and they have an AED, but are AEDs available to all these activities that take place? And even sometimes the transport from one school to another to play certain games. We're finding that the lacrosse teams are well versed in having AEDs because lacrosse has come out and said we are one of those high propensity sports for cardiac arrest. So if you're playing lacrosse, you should have an AED on the field. They haven't mandated it yet, but we're trying, and we've been trying for years. Joanne, I'll give you the next slide here, maybe. I'm trying. There we go. Go back one. There you go.
So we're looking at the hardware audit. What's a hardware audit? Let's just make sure your AEDs are compliant. Some people have had their AEDs for 3 years. Some have had them for 15 years. It's time to go back and take a look at your AEDs, their warranty periods. Let's make sure that they're indemnified. What does that mean? It just means that the AED manufacturer is going to cover you if anything was to go wrong. Districts like to hear that they are covered from the battery to the pads. If anything was to go right or go wrong, you've got a manufacturer that's behind you. In some of those warranty periods of 5, 7, 8-year warranty periods, often they're recommending to replace them after that warranty period is up. The American Heart Association recommends every 5 years. The American Hospital Association does the same. That's because manufacturers used to warranty their devices for 5 years. After that warranty period, it's time to take a look at those units. They are turning themselves on, in a lot of cases, every day or every week to check themselves and deliver a shock right back into their devices. So they're not just doing nothing. So it's real important to take a look at those AEDs, and that's something that an AED specialist can help you with. All the manufacturers offer those types of contacts, and we can help you find the right contact to help you with that. Or you can just go back in your records and see when you purchased that AED and how long that warranty is good for. What we're finding is a lot of districts are also centralizing the costs of owning a defibrillator. Now that they've become part of the law, I'm finding that administration really understands that you can't take sole responsibility for an AED anymore. Somebody needs to find the cost of pads and batteries, and that may just be a line item for your district each year. And you can do it yourself, and there's also service programs available where manufacturers will come in and replace your pads and batteries, and that's one less thing on your plate.
And Joe,
next slide.
All right, let me expand on the warranty periods and the indemnification periods for a second. Most manufacturers' indemnification periods run concurrently with the warranty periods. And up until 2010, 2011, most medical devices only have a 5-year warranty period. So the indemnification is the additional protection that's given to you by the manufacturer in case something goes wrong. And that indemnification stops at the end of most warranty periods. So your legal people in the school district would be interested in knowing that they're either covered or they're not covered. And if it warrants buying new equipment or doing something additional to indemnify themselves with the manufacturer, it's quite a task for them. And so they need to be aware of this so that they're not left in the lurch if something does go wrong. Okay. Clicking on the next slide. There you go, Joanne.
Okay, so I just wanted to touch again on what the law actually says. And again, what's important is to remember that what the state is saying, that they want to assist you to find those funds. They don't want to leave you in the dark here. And what they've offered is assisting the school in making AEDs available in school buildings across the Commonwealth. They want you to realize that also It's very important. All of these defibrillators, it doesn't matter which one you have, they're all on state contract, and they all have state contract pricing. So don't feel obligated to purchase one type of unit if you're familiar with another. That's really important, and we can share that information with you. It's also really important for you to know that the Pennsylvania Accountability Block Grant is also available for you to use. Again, also with the Educational Improvement Tax Credit. Both will permit you to use these funds as innovative education programs where they may have not offered that in the past. So I just wanted to again mention what the law is, those new grants that you can actually tap into, and also that CoStar's state contract pricing is offered on all of those devices. You can switch to the next slide.
All right.
Okay, so Chip Miller says the best AED is the one that's there and working, because he knows what it's like to be saved by an AED. You can go to the next slide, Chip.
Absolutely.
Okay, call to action. District-wide meetings. What I found in a lot of the states that we go into is nurses often like to get their district nurses together along with their boss and make sure that they're talking out the law, see what kind of questions that they have. Once they find out what they need to do to act, they like to bring that up to the administration level. What we're finding out is everybody's centralizing these programs now. You're not the only one responsible since it's the law. At that point, we often meet with administration, which is often an assistant superintendent, the business administrator, sometimes a lawyer likes to be involved, and of course your supervisor. We love for a head nurse to be there, athletics, because often athletics has AEDs, sometimes they're different than the ones that you have, and we want to get them involved. And along with an AED specialist, the one of your choosing. So again, we talked briefly about some of these call to action points, scheduling site evaluations. Again, making sure that you know where your AEDs are, that they're located the right place. This can be done by yourself. You can do this on your own, or contact us. We'll find an AED specialist to help you. Think about your plan moving forward. Let's take a look at our AEDs. Are they upgraded? Are they updated? Do we have policies? Do we have procedures? Do we have a cardiac emergency plan just for our school? Don't fret. We have all this information that we can share with you. Upon request, we'll get it right out. School health, I was pretty amazed when I go onto our website sometimes, and I find that we have grant information right on our website, and I can even tell you where to look. It's our AED, oops, I wrote it down. We'll send that out as well. But we have a little spot right on our website. Right, so we're helping find those grants and innovative programs to get you great pricing, whether it's through Pennsylvania state contract pricing that's offered through the state, or helping you point you in the right direction of grants. And I'm going to let Chip pick up the grant piece.
All right. We can also bring outside agencies to bear for some of these grants, working with a number of foundations, both private and public foundations, that would be happy to seed an expanded AED program or help replace AEDs in schools. We have tools to contact them, and between Joanne and myself, we do have personal contact with just about every parent Heart Watch group in Pennsylvania, as well as a number of other private foundations that can bring money to bear. Your CPR and AED training renewals, they need to be ongoing, and you need to keep track of them. And then develop your compliance and service process so that it's not a burden on the nurse's budget. Develop it so that it becomes a line item in the school district, much like the tires for the school buses and the fire extinguishers and the light bulb replacements and so on. An AED is part of the school facility, and it needs to be treated that way, as a life-saving device, but also that these things do have a shelf life, and they need to be updated from time to time, and they need to be maintained. So we will open it up for questions and comments in 1 second here. I believe Sarah will give us some directions so that we can hear people and take you off mute and so on. I'm sure there are some questions and comments. I'll turn it over to Sarah for the questions and comments. I want to thank you all also.
Thank you, Chip. Yes, thank you, Chip and Joanne. Great presentation. So now we do have time for questions. You may submit your questions. You can't take audio questions, but you can type them into the questions interface box in GoToWebinar, and we will ask our presenters. So we have a few questions already. The first one is from Bridget, and she wants to know if we needed a medical authorization to purchase, why were we able to buy one without it?
Joanne, do you want to answer that, or would you like me to?
Either one of us, you can go ahead.
I'll take a stab at that. The Food and Drug Administration requires that the manufacturers of these medical devices, Class 3 medical device, when they are sold to someone, that there is a prescription that is issued per device. So either it was not bought properly, and there is one device on the market, it is a home model that has an exclusion from the prescription. So if someone sold this to you and said, this is a home model, the expectation is this would be used in a home. This was for mom and dad to use, not necessarily for school use. They should still have a prescription for those in a school district, because of course the school district is not a home. That would be my answer. Joanne, if you want to go a little bit farther.
Yeah, so a lot of people purchase AEDs, they bought them 10, 15 years ago, and they don't realize maybe that they did have medical authorization a long time ago, and it's still, you only have to update it when you buy a new one. I can just let you know that if you have an AED and you want us to check, often the manufacturers do keep them, can get that information, can get this prescription to you. There is one manufacturer out there that offers a prescription at no charge, so that's another reason why you may not have one. But often we find that people did get a medical authorization, it's just been so long, and unless they have what's considered more of a home model, that's how the AED got listed as a home model and therefore does not require a prescription.
Bridget, does that answer your question?
We'll find out if Bridget's able to get back to us. And another question is from Aaron in regards, it's on the prescription as well, in regards to for the AED, should it be renewed on a yearly basis? And does it need to be displayed or just on file?
It needs to be on file, and no, it does not have to be renewed. It is a prescription authorizing the purchaser to receive that device from the manufacturer.
Thank you. And then we also had a question just about when and where the recorded webinar will be available. And just to let everyone know that we post the webinar recording on our website at schoolhealth.com. And then in about 5 days, you'll get a follow-up email from us, and that will include the link to the recording, your certificate of attendance, and all of the information that Joanne and Chip have covered here, contact information and other details that you need to get started. So I just wanted to let everybody know about that. Another question is, can I get a copy of a sample emergency medical plan like we saw in one of those slides?
All yours, Joanne.
Absolutely. And Sarah, you can tell them, yeah, Sarah, you can tell them how to request that. Be happy to get that out.
Sure. We'll include Joanne's contact information, or there will be a simple online form that you can fill out to contact an AED specialist, and that person will be able to provide you with that plan.
Yeah, if you just want to email something out, we can do that. And I just wanted to touch on this real quick. One of the things that me and Chip found out at the PASNAP conference was some people still had AEDs behind locked doors and had gates up, And also, one of the things Chip mentioned that he also has heard is that nurses sometimes apply pads to the person who's gone down, even though they're still conscious. So those are two things that I just wanted to touch on real quick, and I don't know, Chip, if you want to elaborate.
No, just in their protocols, it should be very clear that an AED is used on someone who is not breathing and unconscious, period. AEDs are not heart monitors, although they can do that internally, but there's nothing you're going to see on the average AED that's going to alter your treatment plan for someone who's alive. The manufacturers of all AEDs say in order to use them, the patient should be unconscious and not breathing, period.
I think that's a really good clarification. Another question is from Louise. We have several AEDs that are outdated in that if they need parts, the parts are no longer available, but they have been assured that as long as they say okay on them, they can still be used. They do have a service contract on them, and they are serviced once a year. Is that okay?
Well, I'll take a little bit of that from a manufacturer standpoint, is that the older the device becomes, think of your laptop, think of your home computer, the older it becomes, the higher the propensity there is for a failure. So if they're only being serviced once a year, they're already out of warranty, and when you say that the machine says okay, you don't know whether the pads are going to work, you don't know whether something catastrophic could happen, because most of the machines can't afford to test themselves the way that that service person tests them when they come in once a year. So they might have come out and serviced them and everything might have been working yesterday, but today when you go to use it, something could go awry. And at that point, it's not clear with most of these service programs, once the machine is declared end of life and it's stopped being supported, are you throwing good money after bad by having it continuously serviced? Because you still have to buy batteries and pads and so on. So it may be better to invest in newer technology that you know is going to last for some period of time, with or without a service program.
Hey, Chip, I just want to touch on that, too. I find that sometimes trying with an AED specialist or call school help, find out what the manufacturer is recommending, because often service is, you know, they want to keep doing that service, but sometimes the manufacturer is saying, okay, it's time to trade this in. This is at end of life. So I think sometimes getting that letter, sometimes the nurse does not get the letter that says, okay, this is 10 years old. We're recommending that you replace it. But often service will say, okay, let's just keep servicing it. So you're spending maybe $300 a year to update a device that is at end of life. So like Chip is kind of saying, throwing old money at, you know, throwing new money at an old piece of equipment. You really need to evaluate it, and we really probably can't do it over the phone because possibly your servicing gives you a warranty. Every service plan is different. We'd be happy to take a look at it for you. You know, for that, again, that free evaluation by an AED specialist.
Great, thank you. What happens if a non-trained responder uses an AED? Are they still protected by Good Samaritan laws?
Absolutely, 110%, yes, they are protected by Good Samaritan laws. And it's very clear in the Pennsylvania Good Samaritan law, and most of the other 49 states and D.C. also include non-trained responders now. There are very few manufacturers of devices that speak to the untrained user of the AED. So you start in Pennsylvania, anyone can use an AED, trained, untrained, because what condition is the patient presumed in the first place? They're dead for all intent and purposes. And if someone's trying to use one of these devices, in the 30 years plus that I've been involved with them, none of them have ever erroneously shocked someone. So trying to help someone who's dead, the Good Samaritan law steps in and protects them 110%.
Great, thank you. A question from Joy. With the Pennsylvania grant offered many years ago to the districts that received 2 AEDs, school districts were required to have at least 2 people per school who are trained. Did I understand you to say that there is no law on how many persons need to be trained, but there's only a recommendation? So a little clarification on if there's still a legal requirement to train people.
There is best practices, but as far as Joanne and I know, there is no law in Pennsylvania that requires X number of people per school to be trained. There's recommendations. It's much like the guidelines from the American Heart Association. They're guidelines. And I believe when those 2 AEDs were sent out, there were guidelines that were sent with them. And the guidelines recommended that there be 2 people per school as a minimum. So that is truly a minimum recommendation. And I will go back and check, but I was not aware of the law including any requirement for, they say you need to train people, but there's no magic number that's been presented. Joanne, do you know anything further?
It sounds really familiar that 2 people were recommended to be trained when they gave out those 2 free AEDs per school district. But we'll look into that, and we'll make sure that we get that information. Sarah can send out that clarification.
Correct.
Yes, we can follow up with you by email, Joy, if we find it to be something different. Another question that came in is from Louise. To clarify, realistically, how many years do you recommend schools replace their AEDs? She has heard 5 years, also 10. She realizes that hospitals recommend sooner, but they also have more funding than schools.
All right, I'll start and I'll let Joanne finish. You should go by the manufacturer's recommendation. Number 1, the warranty period. So when we talked about the indemnification, the legal protection for the users and the buyers, that usually runs concurrent with the warranty. And the reason that manufacturers have warranty periods is because they know technology changes over a certain amount of time. In the early days of AEDs, every 5 years there was a new device on the market doing twice what the device was doing before. That slowed down a tiny bit, but it hasn't stopped. So some manufacturers have now increased their warranties to 7 years. Some have increased to 8. And there is one manufacturer that has a 10-year warranty. When a manufacturer declares their device at end of life, that means they can no longer get parts to service it. That means that the little watch batteries inside that keep the computer going will have a propensity to stop working. Not that it may affect the AED, but who wants to take a chance? So, as Joanne said earlier, contact her. If we can get the serial numbers of the AED, or we can come out and do a site assessment and evaluate the AEDs, we'll look up the age of the AEDs, we'll find out where they are in the warranty period, and whether there's been any type of upgrades, any type of recalls, any type of manufacturer's recommendations for end of life with these devices. So every manufacturer is a little bit different. And Joanne, I'll let you take over.
Yeah, what I found is once administration understands that the devices are 8 to 10 years old and that they may have an internal battery that's going to die, or they become end of life, they completely understand. They replace copiers, they replace computers every 3 to 5 years. They replace their phones, they replace cars. They understand that these devices have a certain amount of life, and they always find the funds. So it's not something that the nurses have to worry about anymore. This is an administration issue now that there is a law in place that is basically my right now. So if you have defibrillators that are that you think are at end of life, don't hesitate to bring that to administration's attention. They don't want the liability. They want to move it onto a line item budget and make sure that they are covering their bases moving forward. especially with a law that's going as public as Act 35 has.
Great, thank you. If there are, this is a question from Susan, if there are after-school activities such as PTO activities, does someone need to be trained on AED and be present at the school under this law?
The answer is no. However, the AEDs that are accessible, they should be made accessible to activities after school. There is no requirement in the law to have a trained person there after hours. And remember, the school is not an emergency department. Those AEDs are there for the general activities that take place in the school. The recommendation to have trained responders sort of goes hand in glove with having the AEDs, not necessarily all the one-offs that can take place by having a PTO meeting or an intramural game at 9 o'clock at night, or a 5 o'clock in the morning hockey practice. But if the AEDs are available, that's the key, not necessarily having the trained responders. If it becomes an issue, make it part of your emergency response plan. Say, we have quite a number of activities at school building A after 5 o'clock. None of our trained people are there. So if it's the same group that's coming back all the time, invite them to the training so that you at least have some feel-good part about it, that you've done everything that's humanly possible to offer these people how to use the AEDs. You're not going to be able to guarantee that there's always someone in the school to be able to use an AED. That's not the school district's 100% responsibility. It is more of a making the AED available than it is to have the responders. Does that make sense? And Joanne, I'll let you chime in also.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've done from the very beginning is always recommend that people have signs at the entrance of the facility, even a sign at the sign-in desk saying where your AEDs are, letting the community kind of know that you have AEDs in the building. Often some of those people are AED CPR trained, so I know I'm getting off the topic a little bit of you do not, absolutely do not, in New Jersey or Pennsylvania, have to have a responder on hand after school. That would be great if you could work that out, but it's just, it's not mandatory. Community, as far as them knowing about the device, if they are renting out your facility, when they're signing off on that rental agreement or whatever it might be, let them know where the AED is. Maybe they are CPR trained. Maybe they can save a life. And I just wanted to mention on that the CPR question that we've had come up a little earlier. I actually asked Beth Ann Vaughn at the PASNAP conference about CPR training and asking her, do so many people have to be trained? She goes, boy, I'd love if everybody was trained, but no, there isn't an amount. But I will clarify with that with her again, because that is something that, in New Jersey they suggest 5. And Pennsylvania, that's just not mentioned.
Thank you. And we have one more question, and if anyone has any last questions to submit, please submit them now. Louise asked if she could receive a copy of the law.
Absolutely.
Sure, Louise, we can, I will provide your email address to Joanne, and we can provide that to you. And Joanne's contact information will also be in the follow-up email. So if anyone else is interested in any of the follow-up materials, Joanne will be able to provide those to you. So I think that's it for questions. Can we move ahead to the next slide? So as I mentioned, you will receive that post-webinar email from us in about 5 business days. And that will have a link to the recorded session of today's presentation. It will also provide you with a certificate of attendance. It is not CE credit. However, you may be able to submit it to your professional organization to receive continuing education credit. So we do provide you with a 1-hour certificate of attendance. And also, I'll provide all the contact information that you need. And as we mentioned at the beginning, one lucky attendee will be selected to receive a free cardiac science power heart AED. So good luck to everyone, and we will announce our winner in that follow-up email. For questions or to get in touch with an AED specialist, you can also email Joanne at jnicholas@schoolhealth.com. And we do have a post-webinar survey. When I close the session, the survey will pop. We really appreciate it if you take a moment to share your feedback. Let us know how we can improve, or let us know that we did a good job. And with that, that will end today's broadcast. We'd really like to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.